Back in 1996, Ford took the car world by storm by taking their very conservatively styled Mk3 Fiesta that was launched in 1989 and grafting a brand new edge style body onto it and launching it as the Ford Ka. Back in the late 90s, the Ka defined the city car class in Europe, competing with the likes of the Peugeot 106, the Citroën AX, the Fiat Cinquecento or Seicento. So 26 years after the Ka was originally launched, how does it compare against its bigger brother and, I suppose, its parent, the Mk3 Fiesta? Well, let's have a look at these two examples. Let's start by taking a closer look at the Mk3 Fiesta. It's a very crisply styled car that was launched in 1989. This particular example is a Popular, which is the base model, which means that it's missing things like a passenger door mirror and a parcel shelf and that sort of thing. But as you might have seen from my other couple of videos on the car, the fact that it sort of works still today in the mid-2020s shows that it was actually a very good and solid piece of design and engineering. Starting from the front, we've got some moulded bumpers that sort of form part of the face of the car but are still extremely separate to the car bodywork. We have orange indicators, or gingicators as I like to call them, steel wheels with hubcaps, and they are 13-inch wheels with very narrow profile, no side rubbing strips, quite a large door mirror that is adjustable from the inside, luxury. And we have a 3-door body style that was also available as a 5-door. The rear quarter of the car shows kind of the nice design language that the Mk3 has, where the straight lines meet curves and sort of swoop around the rear lights. I really rather like it. And looking at it from this side, you can see that there's clearly an overhang behind the rear wheel and in front of the front wheel, and that will be contrasted in just a second with the Ka. The Ka is obviously an altogether different affair. It's very swoopy, very curvy, and takes that initial sort of curves and swoops around the rear tail lights of the Mk3 and really takes them up a notch and uses those curves and lines the whole way around the car. We start off with a bumper on the Ka that this particular model is body coloured, but a lot of them weren't, but they form most of the part of the front of the car and gives it its kind of shape and face. We still have gingicators even in this 2001 Ka, but that's necessary because it continues the line of the grille down into the indicator lens, and if it wasn't kind of delineated, I think it would look a little bit strange. The headlights on the Ka are the most distinctive part of its front as they swoop backwards into the bonnet, and they're very much a design statement, very much unlike the Mk3 where they're simply very functional and look like an extension of the Mk2. The bumper line on the Ka kind of extends to become a wheel arch in the front, and that takes us to reveal some alloy wheels, which by 2001 was much more of a requirement for a small, compact, useful city car. Down the side of the body we have this iconic crease from the edge of the wheel arch all the way through the door, and it sort of disappears into the rear quarter. Again, no side rubbing strips, but then again it's a fairly basic car, even though this is a luxury spec model. Door mirrors in this particular car are electrically adjusted. Very luxury indeed. The tailgate design of the Ka is sort of a curvier echo of the Mk3, where you still have the rear light being surrounded by the line from the tailgate and the line of the bumper. So you can see the line I mean, where it goes up the bumper, around the tail light, and then down the side of the body, and then you get the same one around the side of the tailgate, and it sort of follows the contours of the car around the light. And that's exactly the same as the Mk3 really, except that's to do with the body crease, not the bumpers. From the back, the Ka certainly has a more purposeful stance than the Mk3 Fiesta, and that's because it has a much shorter rear overhang. The rear wheels are pretty much in the bumper, whereas in the Mk3 Fiesta they're very much inset into the car, and the bumper doesn't even begin until the rear wheels are finished. Progress is also shown by having a third high-level brake light on this Ka. Let's have a look in the cabin, and we'll start with the Mk3 Fiesta. We've got this kind of plastic sculpted door handle and a key, and I have a feeling we're going to have a familiar story when we get to the Ka. Opens up a big wide door, revealing a very basic sort of vinyl door card that does seem quite reminiscent of other cars from the 1980s. It does kind of date this car quite significantly. Looking inside the cabin, we've got a pair of very sort of sculpted foam seats with this quite fun, I'm not quite sure what you'd call it, but it's kind of a multicoloured fabric that's got a little bit of blue, a little bit of white and a little bit of black and red, and blue, white and red were the colours that the popular Fiesta came in, popular model of Fiesta came in. So I quite like that. That the cloth reflects the colour of whatever car you might have purchased. Interestingly, these seats, which were very innovative at the time, but actually in use sag quite a lot, were designed by the same person who designed the Renault Twingo. Looking in at the fascia and dashboard arrangements, it's all very blocky in here. It's quite hard plastic. We've got some ridges up here. We've got some very simple dash layout there with just temperature, fuel, speedometer and a couple of warning lights. We've got some indicator stalks which have got lights on them there, and wiper stalk over there. I have a feeling that they're going to be quite familiar to us in the KA in a moment. We've got some air vents, some storage. We've got some central air controls here, which are extremely straightforward: hot, cold, direction and speed. Heated rear window, fog light in the rear. We've got a very 1980s Ford radio, no cigarette lighter and an ashtray because 80s and 90s. Over on the passenger side we have a couple of storage areas, big one there for some tapes, and the glove box underneath on this particular model doesn't have a cover, but on most Fiestas they did have a lid that you could put some bits and pieces in there and hide them away. Compared to the Mk2 Fiesta, the fascia of the Mk3 is hugely advanced. But by, I think, the mid-90s, it did seem to be quite out of date. It was very sort of plasticky and angular and square. On the floor here we have a 4-speed manual gearbox, which has got quite a long reach as well. It's quite a very long stick. We've got a couple of speakers on the doors, and again, on the other side, a very plain door card, window winder, a little handle which pushes in to lock it, and a grab handle to close it. No passenger door mirror. Accommodation in the back of the Mk3 is this kind of bench seat, which is again made of the same moulded foam as the front ones. And we've got some sort of very plain vinyl door cards with, of course, an ashtray. Lots of body-coloured metal on show on the top half, but most of it is kind of trimmed. Getting into the KA is a very similar experience to the Fiesta because you have this moulded plastic handle and a very round lock, but the plastic handle is just slightly more rounded than the square one in the Fiesta, just to give it that echo of the KA's altogether more rounded design. Opening the door again reveals a big wide opening, but here we get confronted by a lot of body-coloured metal on the door. And that really signifies that this is a class below the Fiesta in terms of sort of car classes. This is a city car, and it does seem to be much more of a trend in a city car to have body-coloured metal on show on the sort of bottom half of the trim. Having said that though, the door card is trimmed in, I think, leather, or at the very least leatherette, to match the leather interior. The door card here is a very sort of circular and swoopy affair where you've got lots and lots of curves kind of flowing into each other, and that really was part of the Ford New Edge style that was really pioneered by the KA. The grab handle reveals a couple of electric window switches that shows this KA is a cut above some of the rest. We have a similar sort of door handle to the Fiesta, but again it's kind of oval rather than square, and it locks by pushing in the same way as the Fiesta's one. We have a big speaker, reasonable sized door pocket that's got space for a couple of drinks and that sort of thing, but not wildly spacious because I think it's a design compromise really to get the door pocket to fit with that circle. It isn't perhaps the world's most useful door pocket. We also get heated electric mirrors on this car because it is a luxury car particularly. Looking inside the cabin of the KA, we are really confronted by lots and lots of curves, swoops, circles, ellipses and all sorts of things. I don't think there's a straight line to be found in the entire dashboard. This particular model, as I said, is a luxury KA, which means that it comes with these beautiful leather cream seats, and they are really quite something. They look like they belong in something a lot bigger than this KA. They seem quite sizable and chunky and look very supportive, so I'm looking forward to sitting in those in just a second. So looking around the dashboard of the KA, we are really confronted with all these circles and swoops and stuff. It's really quite overwhelming. The main sort of driver's eye line gives you this kind of, I don't quite know what you'd call it, it's almost like a musical note where it starts about there, twists around the centre console down there, up above the driver's instrument binnacle, and kind of ends twisting into the middle of the steering wheel. It's quite elegant, but as you're driving it, you notice that the pod is not symmetrical. It kind of annoys me, I think, but it is part of the overall design of the car, or KA, however you want to say it. Instrument cluster is smaller than the Fiesta. You just get a very large speedometer and a fuel gauge, not even a temperature gauge, some warning lights and that sort of thing. We have some stalks that I think are very familiar to me from the Fiesta. In fact, this one is very slightly different, but that's only because it's from a later Mark III Fiesta, which has got this kind of ridges here. To the right of the driver, we've got one of these funky circular air vents, which I really quite enjoy. They're like a little ball. We have a tiny storage cubby that, as far as I can see, you can't really store anything in it. Underneath that, we've got the electric tailgate release. Such poshness. Centre console gives us two more of those funky round air vents. Down to a very posh looking Ford radio here. Heater controls here, very much standard, but they've moved from being sliders, which is a very 80s style, to much more conventional kind of 90s round knobs. There's also this very important button here, which shows that we are in a very, very luxury version of the KA because it is air conditioning. And the other button that makes it special is the quick clear button here, so we know this is the absolute pinnacle of KA engineering. Over on the passenger side, we get one more air vent over there in the circular fashion, and then we get this strange little glove box. Now, the early KAs had kind of a rotating one, but this one, the later ones, just have a clicky little thing that reveals a teeny tiny, slightly pointless, pathetic glove box, even if I may be so bold. And I think that's kind of the compromise of the KA, is that they really wanted this sort of swoopy dash, but what that has created is this kind of bubble of nothingness. There's just not very useful space in it compared to the Fiesta, which is much more conservatively practical. Moving down to the floor, we are confronted by a 5-speed gearbox, which is trimmed in leather. The back of the KA reveals those two sumptuous leather seats there that rear passengers can enjoy with headrests, and a cup holder, such luxury, and even a can holder there on the side. The boot of the Fiesta requires a key to open it, and it opens to reveal a fairly spacious boot, actually. It doesn't have a parcel shelf, this particular model. The rear seat also folds flat, but only as a one piece, so it doesn't split at all. Although some Fiestas did have split ones, of course. One of the differences that you'll notice as you go into the KA in a moment is that the rear seat in the Fiesta is just in front of the wheel arches, which means it's the full width of the car. So it's a full 5-seater and there's a centre lap belt. Getting into the boot of the KA is an altogether more luxurious affair because you have a button on your remote key, which pops the boot and you can open it to reveal a couple of boot struts this time, and a parcel shelf, albeit a very small one, that has only one cord holding it up. I think earlier KAs had a double cord. The boot is fairly small because the wheel arches kind of impinge on it quite a lot on both sides, but they are carpeted, so that's kind of a big step forwards in sort of perceived quality from the Mark III Fiesta. And as I said, the seats sort of sit just inside the rear wheel arches, and so you have only a 4-seater, but they seem sort of wider and more sculpted than the ones in the Fiesta. It's a much more kind of desirable place to sit. You also get rear headrests as well, because luxury. Both the Fiesta and the KA utilise essentially the same engine, which is the Ford, originally Kent engine, but it's been known by various names. In the KA it's called an Endura E, and in the Fiesta it's an HCS, high compression swirl, super exotic. In the KA it is a 1.3, in the Fiesta it is a 1 litre, but obviously in the Mark III Fiesta it was available at a number of different displacements, I think 1.1 and 1.3 as well. The KA's engine bay, like a lot of very modern cars, is quite tightly packed. The Fiesta's engine bay is altogether larger and gives you significantly more access than in the KA. And on that note, let's go and take these two cars out on the open road, starting with the Fiesta. So then what is the Mark III Fiesta like on the open road? Well, I'm currently driving through the middle of a village, and it's certainly very nippy through the village. The 1 litre engine in it is much more punchy and pokey than you might feel. It gets up to town speeds incredibly easily without any difficulty whatsoever. And although the steering is not power assisted, I don't feel like it's incredibly heavy. One of the major differences between this early Mark III Fiesta and the KA is that all KAs were fuel injection, and the Mark III Fiestas, well, they varied. Eventually they were all fuel injection, but certainly pre-1992, a good deal of them were carburettor equipped cars. There, we're at 40, it's no bother. The clutch is really light, the accelerator response is quite light and predictable. The gear change is really quite, again, very light, very snickety. It goes easily into the gears without any difficulty. You're always 100% certain what gear you're in. There's never any doubt about it. The gear change is particularly aided by the fact that there is a really strong springing action, moving the gear stick from the first and second side of the box to the third and fourth side of the box. So when you're changing up from second to third, there's a little spring that kind of really pushes you into it. It's really, really nice. The interior of the car is quite echoey because we haven't got a parcel shelf in this particular model, so you do get quite a lot of road noise and tyre roar eventually coming through. You don't get too much engine noise, it isn't that bad. Right, let's accelerate to the dizzy heights of 60 miles an hour on this country road, and I don't have fifth gear. That is the downside of this car, is that it doesn't have a fifth gear. It's perfectly good, so I'd accelerated there from 40 to sort of 55, 60. Really bombs through, but it would be nice to give it just that upper cog to just kind of shut it up a little bit. It does feel a bit frenetic in here. The handling though is really, it's quite good. So it goes around a corner really very nicely, but you do feel like the skinny tyres don't give you as much grip as you'd like. It's quite a soft ride. Whoa, as you can tell by the bounciness there. Yeah, it's quite softly sprung. It's quite direct and sharp, but there's a softness there in the body and in the suspension that means you can't completely commit to something that you could in a slightly more capable car. You need to be at a slightly slower speed because you know it'll roll, and you know those skinny little tyres just aren't going to give you as much grip as you know, something that's got a little bit of a wider profile. It'll be interesting to see when I get into the KA in a moment how much Ford developed their ride and handling over the sort of 6-7 years between the launch of these two models. So let's go and do that. Okay then, let's get behind the wheel of the Ford KA, and the main difference is that I don't have to do anything to start it other than turn the key, because we have fuel injection and not a carburettor. We also have the luxury of electric windows. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting. I don't know how I can go with the luxury. In all honesty, this particular car is a slightly bizarre version of the KA because it is a luxury KA, which is kind of not what city cars are generally about. You know, city cars are usually very, very basic, pared down cars that are designed for people who just need a very simple mode of transportation to get about a large city, town, where they don't really do lots of country driving or long journeys. But some manufacturers like Ford and Renault with the Twingo Initial have decided that some small car, city car drivers want the luxury of leather seats. Straight away, driving this car, it feels so much more powerful than the Fiesta. Oh yes, that acceleration from 30, it really, really goes. It's flying. It's a flying machine, this KA, in comparison. And that really is the difference between the bigger bore of the engine and the fact that it's a much more sophisticated, more modern version of the power plant. Ooh, this goes around corners so much better. It's so much flatter and more planted on the corners. I feel like I can really speed through them, whereas in the Fiesta it's much more sort of skittish. Oh, all the guts this car has is quite incredible. And I have a fifth gear. Oh, I can now shut the engine up and cruise along. Oh gosh, it really handles and goes around these corners so well. It's so precise. The steering is strangely heavier than in the Fiesta, even though it's assisted, but that must be because it's assisted, you know, at the extremities, whereas it firms up towards the middle, especially when you're at speed. It's really nice and stable, which is just what you want in a car when you're driving on country roads. Visibility in this car is actually pretty good. It's about the same as the Fiesta. I do feel though that it is a slightly smaller car. I'm conscious that it's a smaller car than the Fiesta. I feel closer to the roof line, I feel closer to the windscreen, that sort of thing. But altogether, that package of tweaks that Ford have managed to do to the Mark III's chassis to update it to become the KA really is wondrous. They've taken what is an already pretty good solid basis and just livened it up that little extra bit, which makes this much more engaging driver's car than the Mark III Fiesta ever could be. There's also a totally different feel here in the cabin in terms of the switchgear and controls. Everything's just that slightly bit more damp. Any button you click just has that slightly deeper tone to it. The Fiesta's buttons are very clangy. This is just more solid. And that is really very much the thing that I think Richard Parry Jones was involved in Ford by the time that the KA was being designed. I think it was his first project for Ford. And he was the one that was responsible for really upping the perceived quality. I'm sure that the builders of this car in Valencia and the builders of the Fiesta that's behind me in Essex and Dagenham would be no more or less competent than each other. But because what they've been given is a product that has just that tiny bit more sophistication in its approach, just means that you end up with a product that feels so much more together, so much more with it, so much more capable, even though it actually, the reality of the situation is they're the same basic car. It's kind of fantastic, really, the difference that a little bit of engineering and clever tricks can do to the perceived feel of a car, and takes that chassis that Ford developed in the late 1980s, launched in April 1989 to be the Mark III, all the way up to finishing the KA's production in 2008. That's a nearly 20-year production run. And in 2008, yes, it did feel out of date in a lot of ways. It wasn't really up to scratch on safety grounds by that point. The body-coloured metal had fallen out of favour, etc. But it was still a really strong seller all the way to the grave, really. This gearbox is sensational, I have to say. The one in the Mark III is very nice. It's very snickety and light. This takes that up a notch by making the individual movements going into the gears just that much more positive. So the springing action I was talking about in the Fiesta that goes from across the box from second to third, for example, is even stronger here, to the point that when it gets into third gear, it's like, oh, you just know it's in the right place. You've got no question whatsoever about which gear this car is in. You're not scrabbling around trying to find them. They are absolutely Winchester rifle precision here. Only little downside is you can still hear that Enduro Ease tappets just flittering away over there in the engine bay. It sort of belies its age a little bit occasionally, and that harshness does come through. But it's a very old engine, so you can forgive it for that. It really is a fun little thing to be in. So what then can I conclude about these two cars? Well, I think it's unfair to say that one is better than the other, because they're simply a different beast. And I think that is what I really want to say in this video. They drive very differently, they behave very differently, they feel very different. And it really is a testament to, I think, Ford's ingenuity and flair in the 1990s as to the fact that they could take what is pretty staid, conservative, but still very competent hatchback and turn it into a city car that endured for a number of years, to 2008, which is sort of 20 years after the Mark III was actually launched. Anyway, on that note, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Please do consider liking and subscribing this video if you have enjoyed it, and stick around for some more content. I will be reviewing lots of other cars, doing lots of other comparisons, which I really enjoy doing. So see you again in the next one. Bye.